I'm gonna do a short discussion on scoring and like some questions I have and the way I scored the Loma fight, the Loma versus Devin fight, and why, or Devin versus Loma since Devin's the champion. So first things first, before I get into that, I left a vid in the description that did like a scoring breakdown showing and freeze framing all the shots that were cleanly landed by Loma and Devin, and the output is completely different from CompuBox. So even if you give and take some shots away, it really kind of blows your mind on the perspective of the fight and punches landing in all the rounds. But let's get straight into it. So the first question I had was about the criteria: ring generalship, defense, effective aggression, hard and clean punches. And I was talking to people. I was like, well, are all the criteria equal? Meaning that just because you land hard and clean punches, if you have great defense, if you don't have great defense, you could still lose the round, and so on and so forth. Like if all the criteria are equal, I don't really like that. I was saying how I preferred the UFC system of damage trumps all. The first thing, it's a tiered system, so there's levels to it, right? Like there's the first level, which is the most important, and it trumps everything else. Damage trumps all, right? So like your reactions to punches, how your body reacts, right? Like stuff like that, right? And if you get knocked down, so on and so forth. So I would think that hard and clean punches slash sometimes effective aggression kind of are the most important criteria, and that those are the first things you look at, and then you go down the list in terms of importance to determining the outcome of a fight, right? People always say defense wins championships. I disagree. Defense secures championships, but you have to score points in order to win the championship, right? So when I was talking about effective punches, Loma versus Devin, yes, Devin landed some good headshots, but if you look at Loma's reaction to almost all of the headshots, Loma eats a left hook or eats a right hand and then keeps walking forward. On the other hand, when Loma was hit with the body shots, you could see him reacting to the body shots. And then later on in the fight, I even used this argument against some Loma supporters, because I was arguing against Loma supporters and against Devin Haney supporters, but mostly Devin Haney supporters because I thought Loma won. But I argued against Loma supporters, and I told them that, of course, those body shots were effective, because they were saying Devin did nothing. I'm like, what do you mean he did nothing? Of course, those body shots were effective, because in those later rounds, Loma had Devin on the verge of being TKO, but he didn't turn up the pressure. I was like, there has to be some reason for that, and it can't be the headshots, because the headshots, like I just said, those weren't slowing Loma down. Something was slowing him down. Part of it may be old age, but old age wasn't slowing him down in round 10 and 11. I think it was the body shots, that investment to the body from Devin. You could see reactions early on from Loma, and you could see reactions later on. I think those body shots slowed Loma down. But on the other hand, on the other side of the effective punches, Loma's straights to the head were also very effective, and Devin fans tried to discount that. I'm like, my whole argument is, when it comes to effective punches, if fighter A throws 10 punches in a round and fighter B throws 1 punch, but fighter B knocks down fighter A, fighter B won that round 10-8, right? So we go down a tier list of damage. The most obvious sign of damage is a knockout. You get unconscious. That's undisputed. There's no question there who did the most damage. The second most obvious sign of damage is a knockdown, right? Well, there's other stoppages, but you know what I mean. Then we go to a knockdown, and then from there we kind of like go down this like nuanced list of how rocked somebody is, how hurt somebody is, if their legs are wobbled, if they look like they're finna go out and stuff like that. And I think Devin is a few chambers below that, or like a few levels below that, because in the 11th round his legs were obviously gone. If you look, Loma catches him with a real clean shot, and the Devin legs go, and then they go into the clinch, and then Devin's legs are still going in the clinch, and the referee breaks him up. Devin kind of stumbles back, and then he gets his legs back. But my whole argument there is basically to say that Devin's punches had a lot of effect on Loma, but Loma's investment paid off more. They both were investing, but the question is, an effectiveness of those investments, those punches, whose investment paid off more? Well, Loma was the only one who hurt somebody in this fight. Devin Haney was the only one that got hurt, right? As far as who showed signs of damage, Loma's punches showed more signs of damage, because in rounds 10 and 11, Devin's chin gave out before Loma's body. That was basically a summary of the argument I kept giving in the comments. Yeah, and then I give people the chance to push back. I'm like, here's how you could change my mind. If you give a presentation, if you give an argument for Devin Haney's ring generalship winning some of those, more of those early rounds than what I gave him credit for, then I could be convinced that Devin Haney won. I'm not going to die on a hill. I don't have to, and I don't want to. I'd rather be in line with the truth than what I want to be the truth, right? So that's the whole purpose of my breakdowns, is that I'm giving my opinions, but I'm doing it in a fact-based way. So basically, I was saying the way I interpret the boxing rules could be wrong, and I'm fine with admitting that, because that means I'll just change and become better, right? So I could be influenced by UFC rules, which I think are superior, because I like the idea of damage trumping all, because damage is one of the most objective things you can measure. In terms of damage, starts out objective and then it gets more subjective, but at that point you can go by punch stats and stuff like that. So that's why I like damage, right? So if no one's clearly doing more damage, then you can be like, okay, well, who landed more shots, right? So there's just like levels of objectivity. You got a knockout, which is super subjective. Then you got numbers, which is quite objective. And then you got like, oh, he's rocked, and that's pretty objective. So that's why I like damage. But maybe that scoring system is influencing the way I look at boxing. And if that's the case, and boxing is completely different, well, then I got to change the way I look at it. And that's why I'm making this video. And the final thing is, this one really gets me. I really hate this idea in boxing. It's a cultural idea, and it's not a part of the scoring criteria, but people act like it is. They always say, to beat the champ, or to beat a champ, you got to beat the champ. I'm like, that is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard, for so many reasons. And I try and ask people, okay, what's the reason you believe that? And somebody said, because the champ had a harder path to get to their belt than the contender did. I'm like, first of all, how do you objectively measure who had a harder path to get to their position? Seems a little bit ridiculous. And then in boxing especially, we have this whole ordeal of champions cherry picking. They always talk about how champions cherry pick and they don't fight the top fighters. It's like, well, in order to be a contender, you got to go through a murderer's row usually, right? So it's like, what if the contender has a harder path to get to the belt than the champ does? Does that mean he should get the scoring advantage, right? And then also the implementation. I question the implementation. I'm like, okay, so if it's a close round versus the champ, then you automatically give that to the champ because you didn't beat the champ that round. You gotta win decisively. It's like, well, why do we? Speaking of cherry picking, why do we cherry pick this rule out and apply it to a very select situation, right? Like, why does a champ deserve to be treated different than any other fighter, scoring wise? They're all fights, they're all boxing matches. Why does the belt change anything about the scoring, right? Like, if we should want equality and fairness and want everybody to get the same chance. Imagine you worked hard for years to become a top contender, and then you're going into a match against arguably the best dude in the world, and then you're put at a disadvantage and you have to do more than him. That's insane. And then think about also what that does to defensive fighters and counterpunchers who aren't gonna be walking forward as much. It's like, oh, so now they have to completely change their style. And like, because the champ can just like cruise, because the champ can get a draw, or the champ can like win close rounds. It's like, come on, bro. I don't think people actually believe in the implementation. I think they just hear this and they're like, okay, this OG or this like this popular figure said this, and a lot of people say this, therefore it's true. Kind of like what some Loma fans are doing with the judging of this fight, but to be fair, some Devin fans are doing it. But with Devin fans, I see them reflecting a lot more on going back and watching the fight. But I don't want this to be a Devin versus Loma thing. I want this to be a scoring thing. But I just saw more introspection from people who said Devin won rather than Loma won. But I don't want to start a war. But I said Loma won, and I'm being quite introspective, so maybe that goes against my argument. But yeah, for the beat the champ thing, those are a lot of the reasons why I think that is an absolutely insane argument. And a lot of people I respect use that argument all the time. I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I think I'll stop here. Immortality Serum out.
Immortality Serum is the faction. Plenty entertainment if you asking. Gaming commentary and reactions. There ain't no faking, neither is the capping. It just goes lights, camera, action. Let's go.